Northumberland, a county steeped in violent history and lore for centuries. Once a battleground between Scottish and English armies, its soil rich with the blood spilt by great skirmishes. The county is also rich with folklore, superstition and the paranormal, from witches and ghosts to boggarts and black cats. Northumberland is blessed with a diverse and beautiful landscape, from the high hills of the Cheviots to the pristine golden beaches, dotted with coastal castles and chocolate box villages. There is a good reason why Northumberland is a big draw with tourists nowadays. But as peaceful and relaxing as Northumberland is during the daytime, at night things can change. And in 2002, a group of night fishermen had an encounter which made meager attention across the whole of the United Kingdom. This is the story of the Geordie Yeti, or the Beast of Bolam Lake as it became known. Deep within the woodlands surrounding Bolam Lake, witnesses claim to have encountered something extraordinary. An 8-foot tall creature, completely covered in hair, with glowing red eyes. Some called it Northumberland's Bigfoot. Others thought it was a hoax. But the mystery of the Beast of Bolam Lake continues to this very day. Before it became the beauty spot we know today, Bolam Lake was known by a rather less glamorous name, Bolam Bog. Following the end of the Napoleonic Wars and the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, Britain entered a period of economic hardship. Soldiers and sailors returned home to find little work available and no welfare system to support them. It was from these difficult circumstances that Bolam Lake was born. Moved by the plight of unemployed veterans, the local landowner commissioned a landscaping project to provide the much-needed work. The renowned architect, John Dobson, was tasked with transforming the bog into an ornamental lake, creating what would become one of the few examples of his landscape gardening work. The project took 3 years of back-breaking labour. 1,000 trees were planted and the land was reshaped. By 1819, the transformation was complete. For more than a century, from 1819 until the end of the Second World War, the lake remained part of the private Bolam estate. At one time, private police were employed to keep members of the public away from the grounds, but by the end of the war, the estate had fallen into decline, and much of the landscape had become overgrown and neglected. Then, in 1972, Northumberland County Council purchased the site and opened it as a country park. Today, Bolam Lake is a haven for wildlife, home to roe deer, red squirrels, countless species of birds, and thousands of visitors each year. But some people believe there may be something else lurking among the trees, something far stranger, the Beast of Bolam Lake. In the January of 2003, the Northeast Press got wind of the sighting, and the blue touch paper was lit, with headlines like "Hunt for Northumberland Bigfoot" and "Lake Beast Spotted." The public's attention was well and truly grabbed. Experts from the Centre for Tea and Zoology were dispatched from Devon, and even I went along to investigate in my battered blue Ford Fiesta. Bigfoot mania was in full swing. But what was the story that started it all? Well, a group of night anglers fishing for carp had just started to gather and pack up their fishing tackle, when the men suddenly noticed an overwhelming shift in the environment. The ambient woodland noises completely died out, replaced by a tense, heavy silence. They immediately felt a distinct sensation of being watched from the dark tree line directly behind their fishing spot. When they turned the flashlights toward the woods, their beams caught a terrifying silhouette. One of the fishermen recounted the exact visual to the Chronicle. It looked about 8 foot tall, heavy built, and what seemed to be its eyes glowed in the darkness. The creature made no aggressive roars or lunges. It simply stood perfectly still, towering over the undergrowth, its eyes always glowing. Understandably, when faced with an 8 foot tall Geordie Yeti, the anglers didn't stop to investigate. Total panic set in. Dropping some gear along the way, they ran at top speed back to their car. When reports of the anglers' encounter reached the media, other witnesses began to come forward with stories of their own. One such account actually predated the fisherman's sighting. One evening, while walking his dog near the lake, a local man noticed something unusual. The birds, which had stopped singing moments before, suddenly fell silent. A detail that seems to crop up time and time again in both paranormal and cryptid encounters. The atmosphere seemed to change. His dog became visibly distressed, refusing to go any further and cowering at his heels. Peering into a nearby thicket, he saw a creature standing beside a hollow tree. It was enormous, around 8 feet tall, heavily built and covered from head to toe in dark shaggy hair. Its most striking feature, however, was glowing red eyes. The creature made no attempt to attack, it just simply stood and watched him and his dog. Overcome with fear, the witness fled back to his car and drove away. The experience shook him so badly that he vowed never to return to Bolam Lake. Another account dates back to the mid-1980s. A group of friends were near the lake when they heard a tremendous crashing noise coming from the dense woodland beside the road. It sounded as though something huge was charging through the undergrowth, smashing trees, bushes, and rhododendrons in its path. One member of the group later described seeing a massive hairy creature burst through the tree line, seemingly oblivious to the vegetation it was tearing through. Needless to say, the group ran. As reports of huge hairy creatures lurking in the woods around Bolam Lake continued to emerge, they eventually attracted the attention of the CFZ, or Centre for Teen Zoology, based in Devon. Lead investigator John Downs assembled a team and headed north to investigate claims. What they encountered would prove to be far stranger than they expected. Armed with night vision equipment, EMF meters, cameras, and other tools, the team spent 5 days and nights exploring the woods around the lake. One of the first odd occurrences involved their equipment. Despite being freshly charged, batteries began failing without explanation. Some investigators speculated that an unusual electromagnetic field might be responsible. Others wondered whether something even stranger was at work. Whilst conducting interviews at a local pub, the team met a witness named Naomi. She and her son had visited the woods after hearing stories about the beast. None of them expected to see anything unusual, and both were skeptical of the reports. That skepticism vanished when they spotted what Naomi later described as a huge black figure standing near the edge of the trees. Both experienced an overwhelming sense of terror and immediately ran back to their car before leaving the area. The strange incidents continued. Whilst one of the investigators was being interviewed by the BBC Radio 4's Today programme near the lake, the surrounding woodland was alive with the sound of rooks and crows. Then, without warning, the birds fell completely silent. Moments later, a loud booming noise echoed through the trees. During another interview, Neil, one of the original anglers, shared additional experiences that he had never previously spoken about publicly. On one occasion, he claimed to have seen the creatures standing atop a rise near the Iron Age settlement at Slate Hill. Then, during the summer of 2002, while night fishing with a friend, he heard what sounded like a very large animal moving around the bushes outside their camp. Deciding that discretion was the better part of valor, neither men ventured out to investigate. The following morning, they discovered that fish had been taken from a bait container, and there were signs that something sizable had been moving around the campsite during the night. It was becoming increasingly clear that Bolam Lake had developed a reputation as a hotspot for strange activity. Further investigations by the CFZ and members of the Twilight Worlds team uncovered what some believed to be structures similar to the so-called Bigfoot teepees reported in North America. Arrangements of branches and saplings apparently constructed rather than naturally fallen. Whether these formations were genuinely unusual remains open to debate. Nevertheless, investigators were intrigued by the discovery of a snapped tree trunk around 5 inches in diameter that appeared to have been deliberately positioned without disturbing the surrounding vegetation. While some members of the team photographed and mapped these structures, others continued to monitor the area with EMF meters and dowsing rods, concerned that further battery failures might occur. Then came what many investigators considered the most significant event of the entire expedition. At around 4:30 p.m., following a reconstruction of one of the reported sightings, a member of the Twilight Worlds team believed they had seen a dark, amorphous shape moving between the trees. As dusk approached, the rooks once again filled the woods with noise. Then, just as it had happened during a BBC interview, the birds abruptly fell silent. Several investigators later described feeling a sudden shift in the atmosphere. Moments later, one of the members of the Twilight Worlds team shouted that something was moving in the woods. Vehicle headlights were immediately turned on towards the tree line. What happened next was witnessed by 5 of the 8 investigators present. Illuminated by the beams, a large bipedal figure was seen running from right to left through the trees before disappearing from sight. Seconds later, the same figure appeared again, this time moving from left to right. For a brief moment, multiple investigators claimed they had seen exactly what they had come looking for: a large, upright creature moving through the forest. Jonathan, still dazed by what he had just witnessed, cautiously made his way over to the spot where the creature had been seen moments earlier. As he approached, he was overwhelmed by an intense feeling of fear and unease. Whatever had been there was gone, but the sense of dread remained. Not wishing to linger, he quickly returned to the safety of his fellow investigators. In his book Monster Hunter, Jonathan admits that he struggled to describe exactly what he had seen. This is his quote: "The creature was incredibly flat and angular. It appeared almost two-dimensional. The thing was black, and I mean matte black. It was so black, in fact, that it was a quasi-human piece of nothingness that had somehow been projected onto the Northumberland landscape. It moved far too sharply and too fast to be a living thing. It was as if someone had filmed this humanoid piece of nothingness and then projected it back onto the landscape using the fast-forward function on an old video recorder." This description is particularly intriguing because it differs markedly from the classic image of a large, hairy, Bigfoot-like creature, as reported by other witnesses. Instead, Jonathan appeared to be describing something far stranger: a dark, almost shadow-like entity that seemed less like a flesh and blood animal and more like an absence of light moving through the forest. It has now been more than 20 years since the investigation team from the Centers for Fortean Zoology visited Bolam Lake. They arrived as skeptics. Given the size of the woods and the limited resources available, they believed it would be impossible for a large unknown animal to remain hidden for any length of time. Like many others, they assumed the sightings were either misidentifications, exaggerations, or perhaps even a hoax. Yet they left with a very different impression. While none of the investigators could conclusively explain what they had witnessed, several had become convinced that something unusual was present in or around the woods. Jonathan Downes himself later suggested that whatever they encountered appeared to be more paranormal than flesh and blood. So, what exactly was haunting the woods and shores of Bolam Lake? More than 2 decades later, there is still no definitive answer. However, several theories have emerged. The most straightforward explanation is that witnesses encountered a real, living animal. One possibility is an alien big cat, often abbreviated to ABC. Britain has a long history of reports involving large black cats roaming the countryside, many thought to be descendants of the exotic pets released after the Dangerous Wild Animal Act of 1976. A large black cat perched on a raised bank, rock, or fallen tree could easily appear as a much larger creature than it really is, particularly at dusk or in poor visibility. The glowing red eyes, described by several witnesses, could also be explained by eyeshine caused by the reflective layer found in feline eyes. Another theory suggests and a scant exotic primate such as a chimpanzee or orangutan may have been responsible for some of the sightings. The problem with this explanation is a simple one. A large ape would require vast amounts of food and would leave unmistakable evidence behind, including tracks, droppings, nests, and damage to vegetation. No such evidence was recovered from Bolam Lake. The CFZ investigation added an intriguing twist to the mystery. Several investigators reported seeing a large black figure moving through the woods. However, they noted that it did not behave like a conventional animal. Rather than crashing through the undergrowth, it appeared to glide between the trees, blending into the shadows. This led some researchers to consider more paranormal explanations. One theory links the beast to ancient folklore. Northumberland has a rich tradition of supernatural legends, and some believe the creature may have been a modern manifestation of a werewolf-like entity or woodland spirit, similar to the Wolva of Scottish folklore. Others have suggested the witnesses encountered what paranormal researchers refer to as a glimmerman, a shadowy figure that appears to distort the light around it. Such entities are often described as semi-transparent, cloaked, or somehow out of phase with their surroundings. Some researchers speculate that these beings may be linked to ley lines, earth energies, or even other dimensions. Interestingly, this theory aligns more closely with Jonathan Downes' own description of the strange two-dimensional black shape witnessed during the investigation. Not everyone is convinced that there was anything mysterious at Bolam Lake. Skeptics, park authorities, and wildlife experts point to a combination of environmental conditions, misidentification, and human psychology. Of the early 2000s, many of the trees planted around the lake during the 19th century had become enormous, twisted, and heavily covered in ivy. In low light, these dark shapes can easily resemble broad-shouldered figures standing among the trees. Human beings are naturally prone to pareidolia, the tendency to perceive faces, figures, and patterns when none actually exist. The local wildlife may also have played a role. Bolam Lake supports populations of roe deer and tawny owls. A startled roe deer can produce a surprisingly loud barking call that sounds almost human, while a tawny owl's eyes can reflect a vivid red glow when caught in torchlight. Combine an ivy-covered tree, a barking deer, and red eye shine, darkness, and an imagination already primed by newspaper reports, and all of a sudden, the legend of the beast of Bolam begins. There is also the possibility of social contagion. Once the story appeared in local newspapers, people arrived at the lake expecting to experience something unusual. In those circumstances, every snapping twig, moving shadow, or rustling bush becomes potential evidence of the beast. Finally, there is perhaps the most controversial theory of all. Northumberland has long been regarded as a hotspot for the unexplained aerial phenomena, particularly around the Cheviot Hills and Scottish borders. Some researchers have noted that reports of cryptids such as Bigfoot and Mothman and other mysterious creatures often occur in the same locations as UFO sightings. Could the beast of Bolam Lake have been connected to these phenomena? Supporters of this theory argue that the creature was not a flesh and blood animal at all, but some form of transient entity associated with unidentified aerial craft. In this interpretation, the beast was simply one part of a much larger mystery. Whatever the truth may be, one fact remains. More than 20 years later, the beast of Bolam Lake continues to provoke debate. Was it a misidentified animal, a trick of light, a product of suggestion, or something genuinely unexplained? The answer, for now at least, remains hidden somewhere among the trees. I've been Richard Napper. You've been watching Favourite Haunts. Sleep tight.